Alabama football suffered one of its most humiliating moments in the proud history of that blue-blooded program on Saturday when Vanderbilt stunned, shocked, embarrassed the Crimson Tide. Well, Tennessee, misery loves company, so they provided Alabama a little bit of comfort by losing to Arkansas, and Missouri got unmasked as a fraud in College Station. It was a topsy-turvy Saturday in college football in the playoff picture. Well, that's murkier than ever. We'll get to that and more on this edition of SEC Football Unfiltered, our podcast from the USA Today Network. I'm Blake Toppmeyer alongside John Adams. On the episode today, we'll do a bit of a playoff reset as it pertains to the SEC. Look ahead to some big games this weekend. But first, let's take the temperature in Tuscaloosa after a really unpredictable loss on Saturday in Nashville. Alabama fans, of course, took over the stadium in Nashville. It was a de facto home game. Alabama, a 24-point favorite, fresh off of a win against Georgia. And lo and behold, they lose to Vanderbilt. So for more on this, I wanted to chat with Paul Finebaum, host of the popular Paul Finebaum Show on the SEC Network. He's been covering Alabama football for more than 40 years in some capacity. So let's hear from Paul here on what he has to say about this Alabama loss, and we'll react with our thoughts.
I mean, in your time following Alabama, covering that program, where does this loss sort of fit into Alabama history?
I think in many ways this is the most shocking and shattering loss I have ever seen, because it comes in such a short period after one of the great moments in recent history. And I think that's why it's such a shock to the system. 7 days after it looked like this program had moved on from the greatest coach of all time, the mystique already seems shattered. I mean, that is what I think is so hard to wrap one's arms around. I mean, I can give you a number of games in the past where the next Monday was completely manic. The kick six game, things like that. But I mean, that was a number one team losing to the number 4 team. Mm-hmm. Even in 07, the game you hear about so much is the La Monroe game. That was a team that Saban had inherited that was 6-7 the year before, that was 500 that year. So yeah, I mean, it's still shocking, but you knew the program was getting better. You knew the recruits. This comes 10 months after the most seamless transition I have ever seen. A coach who has only been praised, who seemed to check every box correctly. And then somewhere around the third quarter of the Georgia game, things started to unwind. It's like, it's like, you're watching Alice in Wonderland, or I mean, suddenly Cinderella had to get home. And I'm wondering, like, was this a mirage? Did Kalen DeBoer, get some secret magic sauce, and he simply used it all in the first half of the Georgia game, and now he can't find it because it just doesn't feel or look like the same team.
Well, there you have it from Paul. John, you've covered SEC football for about 7 lifetimes. You heard from Finebaum call it a shocking and shattering loss, maybe the most shocking and shattering loss that he can ever recall. How about you? Do you have a comparable to this? What was your response to Alabama losing to Vanderbilt?
I think anytime anybody loses to Vanderbilt, there's a shock factor. I mean, Missouri almost lost to Vanderbilt. That was kind of shocking too. It was unbeaten, and as you said, unmasked against Texas A&M. We seem to be having more of this stuff in college football now. So maybe fans need to buckle up and be prepared for it. But I thought it was interesting. Paul made the transition from the great high against Georgia to the great low against Vanderbilt. I'm trying to think. Paul brought it up. The Louisiana-Monroe game, Saban lost in his first year at Alabama. Alabama doesn't lose to Louisiana Monroe. It's not supposed to, no matter what the dire circumstances are around the program. I go back also to Nick Saban's first year at LSU when he lost to UAB of all teams. So I don't look at that loss and say, here's a doomsday scenario. Get rid of Kalen DeBoer right now. He's done. Horrible mistake. No, his record speaks for itself, and that was a great win over Georgia. So I think Alabama fans have to be not too manic. Paul used that word, not so manic, and just kind of wait for some games to play out before they really make judgment. I thought the one thing though that will hurt DeBoer, and I think this hurt will be immediate but not long term if Alabama bounces back. Nick Saban was a defensive guy.
Mm-hmm.
Kalen DeBoer's an offensive guy, and even in defeat, Kalen DeBoer's team scored 35 points, so his offense is working, but the defense was baffled, bewildered, whatever you want to call it, against Vanderbilt's little option offense that it runs, which was run impeccably by Diego Pavia, who looked like the best quarterback in the SEC in their last week, and there are a lot of good quarterbacks in this league. So I think that's what DeBoer detractors, if there are some, will point to that. Well, no Nick Saban team gives up 40 points to Vanderbilt.
Yeah, and we can get all the caveats out of the way of this is a better Vanderbilt team than it was the past few years, past several years. That's true. This is a Vanderbilt team that added over 20 transfers in the offseason, including Diego Pavia, the former New Mexico State quarterback, who last season quarterbacked New Mexico State to a win over Auburn. Very nice player. That's true. Vanderbilt's it's not the doormat that it's consistently been in the SEC. But all those caveats out of the way, this was an Alabama team that had just beat Georgia. Just beat the Georgia team, well, not the same team, but the Georgia program that had won two of the last three national championships. The Georgia program that was supposed to inherit the throne after Nick Saban's retirement. So it loses to Georgia, and then it loses to the team with Vanderbilt across the chest, a program it hadn't lost to in 40 years. Last loss to Vanderbilt was 1984. And so that is the shock value of it, of even though Vanderbilt is somewhat better this season, it's still the perception of Vanderbilt is that Alabama doesn't lose to Vanderbilt. And it's as I wrote, John, I think Alabama fans can forgive Kalen DeBoer after a loss like this, depending on what comes next. If Alabama rebounds, makes the playoff, maybe wins a playoff game or two, I think Alabama fans can forgive Kalen DeBoer. However, they won't forget this loss. There's a difference between forgiveness and forgetting something happened. And Kalen DeBoer will always be the guy that lost to Vanderbilt. Now, he can go on and have a legendary tenure after that. Nick Saban is always the guy that lost to ULM. Alabama fans still remember that. They can recite the score of that game that Saban lost 21-14 to ULM, but he recovered. He won 6 national championships. So I don't think Alabama fans will forget this, but they can forgive. But I think to forgive this loss for Kalen DeBoer, he has to make the playoff this year. This ratchets up the pressure, I think, on Kalen DeBoer making the playoff, because otherwise he goes into the offseason. Let's say they finish 9-3 and don't make the playoff because of a loss to Vanderbilt. That's going to be the narrative around Alabama all offseason, is that Kalen DeBoer didn't make the playoff in his first year because of Vanderbilt. And that's not a narrative you want hanging over your head for 6 months in the offseason.
You're right about that. And I never expect SEC fans of any school to be forgiving. So one thing that helps him is his recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't erase the loss to Vanderbilt, but Alabama fans and any program's fans in the SEC that have success are always looking to what's next. And I think there was a question about DeBoer coming into this league. There's a question about any coach coming in here who's not from these parts, as they say. and you wonder, coaching record was fine, but what about recruiting? Can he get in the Shark Tank with these other SEC coaches and compete for recruits in the Southeast? Well, we don't know, but he's done great at that so far. So, and he got Ryan Williams to stick with his Alabama commitment. He decommitted, then recommitted to Alabama. So that was a big gain. So, but you're right. What happens, Blake? We've seen it so many times. When you have a significant loss, significant mistake, that's the game when things go awry that fans always point to. You blow a game to Auburn in 2 years. Fans will look back. Well, see, you remember that Vanderbilt loss? I knew then we might have hired the wrong guy. So what they do is they compound the two, revisit previous trauma and bring it back up in evaluating a coach. So you want to try and stay away from those catastrophic games. Unfortunately for DeBoer, he can't do that. But if he wins out and he's in the playoffs, fans will be okay with it.
Yeah, and then in the night game, John, another upset, maybe not as surprising as the Vanderbilt one, but another upset unfolds. Tennessee, its offense that looked so great 2 years ago behind Josh Heupel, who developed this reputation for being a persistent, deft hand with quarterbacks, well, that's nowhere to be found the past couple Tennessee games. Tennessee mustered just 14 points. Its offensive line appeared to be in tatters. Nico Iamaleava, he didn't look like the five-star quarterback we'd been talking about throughout the season's first month. And Arkansas surprises, humbles, defeats Tennessee 19-14 in a game that kind of reworks the outlook for Tennessee. I mean, Tennessee was playing with house money before this loss, John. They could have made the playoff at 10-2, losing to both Alabama and Georgia. I didn't think they needed to beat either of those teams to make the playoff. Now they need to beat at least one to get to 10-2 with a win over one of those rival programs to make the playoff. We're going to reset the playoff field here in a moment, but just on that game in particular, I know you're watching it closely, covering it for the Knoxville News Sentinel. Your perceptions of what went wrong for Tennessee in that one, and do you think it's a one-off, or do you see some lingering concern, as they try to get off the mat and make the playoff?
That game raised a lot of questions. It made us revisit Tennessee's previous games. Kent State, Chattanooga, non-competitive. NC State, a vastly overrated team that was number 22 in the country, terribly overrated. It's got 3 losses now. So shove all those games aside. Those victories are kind of meaningless. Then you look at the Oklahoma game, Oklahoma with a talented defense, but an offense in disarray, just racked by injuries, 5 receivers out. Offensive line was a mess, hurting there. So then you're saying, well, in a way, you kind of looked at this as the first test for Tennessee. And I wasn't even sure Arkansas would be a test based on what I'd seen of Arkansas. But Tennessee failed that test spectacularly. So you really, you kind of reshape your opinion based on, well, maybe it had to do with how bad those opponents were. The other thing, and the one you brought up right away, the one is the most puzzling, is this looks nothing like a Josh Heupel offense. You could excuse his conservative play against Oklahoma. The field was weak in terms of it wasn't a stable surface. Players were losing their balance. Oklahoma has talented players on defense, and Oklahoma's offense is a mess. So you can win this game with defense. Don't make mistakes. Don't hand the game to Oklahoma, which Tennessee didn't. The game wasn't as close as 25-15 final score. But now you go to Arkansas. My take going in, well, Tennessee's going to cut it loose now. Get back to being Josh Heupel. And it didn't at all. It was a continuation of the Oklahoma game, except Arkansas has more offense. Moreover, Tennessee it was lucky the score wasn't much different. It was very fortunate to be in that game after the first half. It easily could have been a 17 to 20 point game. So it kind of got breaks. Arkansas couldn't finish drives. And that's in keeping with Coach Sam Pittman's record there, 6-16 in games decided by one score. So Tennessee jumps out, takes that 14-3 lead, and you think, well, okay, here they go. But they didn't. And they were whipped at the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. And Heupel just brought nothing to the table. There was nothing creative about what he did. He didn't. If you're saving a play, now's the time to unsave it. Nico Yamaleava, I got emails from fans comparing him to Joe Milton, who was much criticized last year because of the uncertainty. Nico looked unsure of himself where to go with the ball. And he also looked unsure of himself when he was running. I just thought he would cut it loose at sometimes, and he didn't. I mean, he looked like, well, should I go? Should I not? Very indecisive on the sideline with the coach, on the field of play with Nico. So it was just an awful night for Tennessee.
You mentioned Sam Pittman, John. Coming into the season, Pittman sat on the hottest of hot seats. Well, it was Pittman and I guess Billy Napier battling for that throne of king of the hot seat. And Pittman, for whatever his faults may have been last year as a football coach, affable guy. I think he is pretty self-aware as much as any coach is. And he was even joking the days, acknowledging publicly that, yes, he is on the hot seat. In fact, there was a reporter at SEC Media Days that started a question mentioning to Sam Pittman that he'd seen his name on some of those hot seat lists. And Pittman interrupts and says, oh, no, I'm at the top of the hot seat list. I'm not just on the list. I lead the list. So very self-aware. But now Arkansas is 4-2. They've got some winnable games left on the schedule. They play Mississippi State, which looks like the doormat of the conference. They play Louisiana Tech, and they play Missouri, an opponent that's been tough on them throughout the course of that rivalry since Missouri joined the SEC. But Missouri looked incredibly vulnerable, incredibly weak, incredibly infirm in that loss to Texas A&M. So that's starting to look like a little bit more of a coin flip game. I mean, there is an avenue to 6-6 or 7-5 for Sam Pittman this season, pretty realistic. And then, maybe they surprise someone like an Ole Miss or an LSU. Let's say Sam Pittman gets to 6-6, 7-5. Do you think his job is safe at that point? Because I think it is. But I'm curious what you think.
Safe might be a stretch. I think it really depends on if Arkansas knows whom to hire. If Arkansas has a guy it really believes in, that it can hire and bring in and replace Sam Pittman, I think it should and would make the move. But if it doesn't, and I don't know who that coach would be, but if it doesn't, then at 6-6, that would denote progress. You go from 4-8 to 6-6. You play in a bowl game. But then if you lose the bowl game, you never know with bowl games, a bunch of guys opt out or whatever happens. So I wouldn't say his job is secure. I think he has a much better chance. What would really help him if he can win some of the games you mentioned, if he can upset somebody else, a win over Missouri in the season ender, that would be huge for him. And as you said, Missouri looked incredibly vulnerable against A&M. And the weaknesses that it showed would really expose it against Arkansas with those big running backs Arkansas has. Le'Veon Moss for Texas A&M, he was tearing up Missouri. Connor Wegman was complemented that with some terrific passing. But yeah, so I wouldn't say safe at this point. There have been too many problems in the Sam Pittman era. So it might come down to, do you have somebody you're really sure is better?
Mm-hmm. So maybe we can de-escalate him from the scalding hot seat down to the warm seat. Maybe he's turned down the temperature just a bit.
I wonder if, when you look at that Florida Arkansas comparison, I wonder if fans say, like, you say, my girlfriend's hotter than yours, or my coach is hotter on the hotter seat than yours.
The way I look at it, though, John, is this. I think, if this were a professional franchise and run by an owner, you might be striving for greatness, striving to win Super Bowls, let's say. But I don't think that athletic directors oftentimes make decisions like the owner of a professional franchise might. Being an athletic director is all about self-preservation. Working in college, higher ed, particularly college athletics, period, it's all about self-preservation. And so I think ADs make a move when they feel like they have to make a move to save themselves. Well, I look at the situation in Arkansas right now with AD Hunter Yurachek. He's in a pretty good spot. I mean, he just hired John Calipari to be the men's basketball coach there, and that is an SEC school that cares very deeply about basketball. So I think Hunter Yurachek enjoys, a nice situation as Arkansas's AD. And so I think if Arkansas were to go 6-6, 7-5, Hunter would not necessarily be feeling a ton of heat to feel like he had to make a move. And so you save that card in your hand, because if you play the fire the coach card now, and then your next coach fails, then as an AD, you start to face the heat. And so I think if you're an AD that's in a comfortable situation, everybody's happy you just hired John Calipari, your football coach gets to 6-6, 7-5. No, that's not where you want to be, but you improved over last season. You keep that trump card in your hand of firing the coach, kick that can down the road. And I know that's not the way fans want to look at it, but I'm telling you, most ADs, you've seen it too, John. They're survivalist, right?
Sure.
They're looking out for number one. They don't necessarily want to play those cards if they can save them for a year or two down the road when they really need to play that hand.
Blake, you're right about that. And they're looking at, they see it as another year on my contract. Ooh, I've got through add one more year. When I look at though, when you go big picture and you look what the future might bring, obviously it's impossible to tell, but the way the schedule is set up, this is an interim schedule for the SEC. Maybe it'll finally getting around to have a permanent scheduling format, but maybe not. Who knows? Maybe we'll just go from 1 2-year plan to another one. But Arkansas' schedule next year, you just flip the games. It's the same teams they're going to be playing in the conference, but you'll be going to LSU, Ole Miss, Texas, and Tennessee. That's a rough schedule, and but again, you may be right. I think if it were all just about winning and about what's best for the program, you might look ahead and said, better to make the move now than later, because we don't want to be in the same situation next year that we are now, where we're uncertain. I can't imagine anybody in Arkansas's administration thinking Sam Pittman is the guy. We just got to give him time. I can't imagine that thought popping into anybody's head.
Yeah, although Arkansas had a real time hiring a coach last time around. I mean, Sam Pittman was not the first choice, right? And so with memories of that in mind, I don't know that Lane Kiffin's walking through that door. He didn't walk through that door last time, so why would he walk through that door this time, right? I mean, every fan thinks you're going to get Urban Meyer, but we haven't seen Urban Meyer take a job after leaving Ohio State. So, but fans don't think that way, right? They think, why do I want this 7-5 coach when I can go out and hit a home run? But I'm not sure that they would replace Sam Pittman with a home run. Might be replacing Sam Pittman with a Chad Morris. But let's reset.
Yeah.
Or a who?
Or a pop up to the infield.
Yeah, no home run, a pop up to the infield fly. Let's reset the playoff picture here, John, because I think for weeks you and I have been on the same page, thinking the SEC can get 5 to the playoff. With Tennessee going down, with Missouri getting unmasked, I think it's becoming more likely, not certain, but more likely that the SEC could cap out at 4 and not get 5. Now, one thing working in the SEC's favor is that Southern Cal and Michigan are going up in flames in the Big Ten. So the Big Ten might be capped at 3 and may only get Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State. So that would work in the SEC's favor, give them a better chance at 5. But still, these losses are starting to add up in the SEC. And so I want to take a look at 3 teams that I think a week ago or certainly 2 weeks ago, but even a week ago, we would have said pretty good situation for the playoff. I'm setting aside Texas because they still enjoy great positioning, but I think a week ago, among the best the teams with the best chances in the SEC would have been Texas, some ordering of Texas, Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia. And there would have been others in the conversation like Ole Miss, LSU, maybe a couple more. But the conversation had to include at that point those four plus Missouri. Well, I've scratched Missouri off the list. You lose by 31 points to A&M. In my mind, you're out. You're not making the playoff. And Texas, I still have in a pretty safe camp there. But looking at the other three, Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee, now all sitting with loss, all still got some landmines on the schedule. Which of those three do you think would be most likely to miss the playoff? If you can only have 2 out of the 3 making the playoff, out of Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee, who's getting left out in the cold?
I think it's Georgia, Blake, because of its schedule. It still has to go to Texas and Ole Miss. Georgia hasn't done what Alabama and Tennessee have done, and it hasn't lost to an underdog, a double-figure underdog. Tennessee game, I think, was 13.5 or 14 points. Alabama, prohibitive favorite against Vanderbilt. Georgia with road trips to Ole Miss and Texas. I guess it comes down to the fact I'm just not that high on Georgia. I just don't look at it and see the Georgia teams of recent years. I think it's limited in big play potential. Now, that's kind of treating that Tennessee game and maybe the Alabama games as sort of aberrations. These things happen. You have a bad day. You don't pull through. But I look at that schedule with Georgia, and I also look at the team I've seen, and to me, it has trouble offensively. And I can see it losing more. So right now I'd pick Georgia. Maybe none of those teams will make the playoff.
The doomsday scenario for the SEC.
Yeah.
I could see the case for Georgia, and they were more, I guess, clinical than impressive in handling Auburn on Saturday, a game that sort of got overlooked because of all the drama occurring elsewhere. But I think I would put Tennessee now at the head of the list of most likely to miss the playoff out of those three because they've lost the cushion. Before they could lose to both Alabama and Georgia. Now they have to beat at least one, and I just don't know if I see that happening. I mean, the Georgia game is at Georgia, and I think to your point, Georgia may have lost another game between now and then. So if Georgia's got 2 losses, they're facing playoff elimination at home against Tennessee. I think Georgia would pull that one out, particularly because the game is in Athens. And so that would put it on Tennessee having to beat Alabama in Neyland Stadium. And that feels plausible. But as bad as Alabama's defense was at Vanderbilt, I still really like the Alabama offense. It's been pretty consistent for the last few weeks now. They had a couple turnovers against Vanderbilt, and that was costly. They still scored 35 points. I'm not off the bandwagon entirely on Kalen DeBoer as an offensive mind and Jalen Milroe. And so I guess of any unit, if we're looking at either side of the ball, Alabama, Tennessee, the unit I probably trust the most is Alabama's offense. Now, you could say, well, Tennessee's defense has consistently played really well, and they have. But we have not seen Tennessee play a good offense yet. They've made it this far in the season, still have not played an opponent with a good offense. So I'm just still not quite sure on Tennessee's defense. I think Tennessee's defense is good. I just don't know how good, whereas I do believe still in Alabama's offense, if they can clean up a couple of those turnovers, I still think that's a high-functioning unit. And so in what feels like kind of a coin flip game around the corner for Alabama, Tennessee, I guess I would lean Alabama. And I'm now starting to relook at this game Saturday, John, one that had been for a couple weeks now, I think, penciled in as an almost automatic for Tennessee. They're hosting Florida. Well, we know that rivalry for many, many, many years now has been heavily tilted into Florida's favor. Now, if this game were at the Swamp, I would think even more so that Tennessee needs to be on upset alert Saturday. But even in Neyland Stadium, Florida's looked a little bit better the past few weeks. I know the competition stepped down, but they didn't have too much trouble with Mississippi State a couple weeks ago on the road, and they took care of UCF this past weekend. Now, those aren't wins that are going to get Billy Napier into next season. They extended his clock a little bit, but I did think you saw a little bit of progress there from Florida. They're working this 2-quarterback system between Graham Mertz and DJ Lagway pretty well the past couple games. And so I just think there might still be another mysterious game on Tennessee's schedule, Florida or Kentucky. Could that ensnare the Vols just the way Arkansas did?
Well, yeah. After the Arkansas game, you certainly could. You certainly could think that. One of the many troubling things about Tennessee's defeat was that it couldn't contain Taylon Green, Arkansas' 6'6" quarterback, who all the stats show is better throwing on the run outside the pocket than he is just sitting back in the pocket and making throws. He did make some throws from the pocket, but overall, he's usually better on the run. And Tennessee kept letting him get out of containment. I thought that was significant because if you can't contain him, what are you doing against Jalen Milroe? You're going to have bigger problems when he gets outside containment. So that's an issue. Those other, as far as Florida goes, it's quarterbacks. Lagway's more mobile, so that might help him. Quarterbacks, I don't know what their completion percentage is. It's got to be about 85% the last 2 weeks combined between the two quarterbacks against Mississippi State and now UCF. Florida has been vulnerable to the run, extremely vulnerable. Yet, yet UCF, I think the 5th ranked best running team in the country, in the top 5 certainly, didn't run the ball effectively. So that maybe Florida's getting better. Tennessee needs to be able to run the ball. The way this offense is functioning or not functioning right now, it needs to be able to run. And you brought up something else about the defense. There are big questions about Tennessee's secondary. And the pass rush has been good. The defensive front's so good. It looks like that hasn't been an issue. But Tennessee gave up 297 yards passing to Arkansas. Florida can throw the ball around. Maybe not deep, but it's good on short and intermediate routes. So it can't let Florida control the ball with short passing game. And we may know more. I think we'll know a lot more about Tennessee after this game. We'll be able to look back at the Arkansas game and perhaps see it differently or perhaps the same way. I'd just like to get another game for Tennessee to really evaluate what happened in that Arkansas game.
John, you swung big with your preseason playoff picks and made one of the poorest predictions in the history of this podcast, which I realize only dates back a few years, but still it sounds good to say one of the worst predictions in podcast history. When you picked Iowa to make the playoff. However, you might have had a sneaky good one in there too. When I wasn't mocking you over picking Iowa, I was pretty impressed that you went out on a limb with Texas A&M, which has burned you time and time again. I mean, you got skin grafts from how many burns A&M has given you over the years, and it looked like that was going to happen again this season. You know, you were trying to hype up the Aggies a little bit, saying you're still a believer. This is going to be the year, and then week 1. They lose at home to Notre Dame, and we kind of put A&M aside for a few weeks. But now I think they're coming back into focus, and that playoff pick, preseason playoff pick to me seems very much in play. And Texas A&M, their problem for years now has been their offense is not multidimensional. They haven't had a better than average quarterback, really, I mean, very rarely in A&M's history. Not just the last few years, but I mean, you think about the great quarterbacks in Texas A&M history, pretty short list. So that's been a years-long problem for them. They had Johnny Manziel when they came into the SEC, but I mean, who have they had quarterbacking them since then? Kellen Mond really is kind of the number 2 quarterback in their SEC time. Well, now Connor Wigman, who'd been out with a shoulder injury for 3 weeks, comes back, and I thought it was a pretty daring move by Mike Elko, first-year coach, to switch quarterbacks. Marcel Reed had been the quarterback of 3 straight wins while Wigman was hurt. The offense had really been kind of run first, but Reed's pretty dynamic as a runner. It was working. Wigman comes back from injury. Boom, Wigman's back in the starting lineup, and it gave that offense another dimension. Connor Wigman had the best game of his career, in my opinion, especially when you consider the competition. He was pinpoint with his accuracy. His wide receivers helped him in the few times that he was a little bit off the mark. The run game was really good, and we know that Texas A&M defense is nasty. The defense hasn't been the problem. It's been the offense. The defense still looks the part. The offense was good. I know Missouri was overrated. That's not the point. The point is, I think Texas A&M emerged as a real playoff contender. You look at what's left on their schedule. They have 2 ranked opponents left. They get LSU in a few weeks at home, and they end the season at home against Texas, and the first time that rivalry game will have been played in 13 years. How are you feeling now with A&M at 5-1, win over Missouri, lost to Notre Dame, about your preseason prediction that they would make the playoff?
Well, I can't really shake that Notre Dame game. So I don't feel as good about A&M as I did going in, because I was anticipating it winning that Notre Dame game.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. The schedule is favorable. All of A&M's tough games, their toughest games at least, are at home. So it's got a good home field advantage. But boy, it took the air out of the stadium when Notre Dame comes in there. I just thought bad coaching on Mike Elko's part. And I thought Connor Wigman, you said he had a career game against Missouri. He had a career bad game against Notre Dame. I would have pulled him after the first half against Notre Dame. He got nothing done. Maybe there was something wrong with his shoulder then, and I just didn't know it, and they didn't announce it. He completed about 12 of 30, it seemed like. So, yeah, he looked great last week, but I'll evaluate A&M kind of the way I did Tennessee. I want to see more. But what I saw against Missouri was kind of the team I expected to see in a best-case scenario, and what I thought would beat Notre Dame. And I don't think Notre Dame's a world beater, and lost to Northern Illinois. So,
yeah, and I wonder, and I thought, the A&M offense was horrible in that season opener. I wonder now, and maybe this is some revisionist excuse making, but was it a case of new coach, new system? They just didn't have Connor Wigman didn't have the offense ironed out at that point. Maybe not. Maybe it just laid a stinker in that game, or Notre Dame. We know Notre Dame's defense is good. That wasn't the issue for Notre Dame necessarily against Northern Illinois. So, yeah, it was hard to explain why they were so bad in that opener offensively, but it was a total 180 this past weekend. And so, yeah, I don't know that I have A&M written into the playoff in ink or anything. There's not many teams that I have written into the playoff in ink at this point. Maybe Ohio State, maybe Texas. List probably doesn't go much further than that. But I do think, as I look at the playoff picture from the SEC, if I'm ranking teams like from likeliest to least likely to make the playoff, I think I would have Texas 1, likeliest to make it. I'm a little bit higher on Georgia's chances than you. I'd probably have Georgia 2, maybe Alabama 3. It starts to get real murky real fast. And I think you could make a case A&M's chances of making the playoff are about, 4th or 5th best in the SEC. We haven't discussed Ole Miss and LSU. I think there is room in the playoff for one of those teams. They both have 1 loss, but this Saturday feels like an elimination game in Baton Rouge. Ole Miss goes to LSU. Ole Miss favored by a few points. You could get to the playoff with 2 losses. I think LSU certainly could. Ole Miss probably could, especially as losses pile up across the country. But whoever loses this game has 0 margin for error from that point out. And so, I feel like if I've already scratched off Missouri from my playoff list after Saturday's result, even though they're mathematically not eliminated yet, in my mind, they're eliminated. In my mind, I'm eliminating the loser of this Ole Miss LSU game. I just don't see the loser of this game running the table and getting to 10-2 and making the playoffs. So I think loser's going to be battling for the Citrus Bowl or whatever the top bowl games are anymore that aren't part of the playoff.
When we look at teams in preseason and project playoff possibilities, we don't account for upsets.
Mm-hmm.
We go down a schedule and we say win, win, loss, win, win, loss. And you look at getting to 10-2. Well, what we've had in the first half of the season, Alabama, Ole Miss, and Tennessee have all lost games they should have won. So that's and I'm with you. I'm eliminating Missouri. That loss was so devastating, so bad, so one-sided. And then you couple that with a 3-point win over Vanderbilt. So in an easy schedule, forget about Missouri. But those other three teams, if they would have just done what they were supposed to do and what the odds maker said they would do, they'd be looking really good right now. And I look at LSU, that loss to Southern Cal. Ooh. Now Southern Cal turns around and loses 2 games and loses to the row your boat guy at Minnesota. That stings. That doesn't help LSU now. Forget about USC in the playoff. And not a good loss for LSU.
We have our picks to get to here in a moment, John, but as we wrap up the playoff conversation, as you see it now, do you still lean 5 playoff teams for the SEC, or are you at 4? Right now, I'm at 4. I think it might be likelier that the SEC gets 5 than the Big Ten gets 4 at this point. I mean, with USC and Michigan taking on so much water. I mean, I know Indiana and Illinois are sort of the flavor of the day in the Big Ten, but let's see what the second half of the schedule has in store for those programs. I'm not taking them seriously in terms of the playoff. I think I have the Big Ten pretty much etched in at 3 teams: Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State. Whereas the SEC, I'm kind of waffling between 4 and 5, but I'm probably on the 4 side of the fence at this point.
Well, in preseason I said 5 SEC teams, 3 Big Ten teams. I'll stick with the 3 from the Big Ten. But when LSU and A&M lost those season openers, I dropped it down to 4 teams from the SEC. I think those losses will come back to impact the conference negatively. I just think they were significant losses because you could be competing with Notre Dame for an at-large bid if you're an A&M, and they're supposed to value head-to-head competition. We never know which rule they might apply to which matchup, but we'll see. But yeah, I think 4, the SEC is probably going to get 4. But gosh, I can't see it going lower than that, though. Can you? I would.
No, I still think 4 will be the minimum. I think for the SEC, if you could kind of get into the brains of the folks at the league office there in Birmingham, I think they would want Ole Miss to win this weekend, because I think Ole Miss has an easier path to playoff than LSU. If Ole Miss beats LSU, they have the 1 loss. They might lose to Georgia later this season, but the schedule is not that daunting, other than Georgia if they beat LSU. Whereas LSU, they have to go to Texas A&M. They have Alabama. So I could see LSU beating Ole Miss and still losing 2 more games, almost knocking Ole Miss out of the playoff and then not claiming a spot for themselves. So, yeah, I lean 4 with you. Which 4 it's going to be, boy, that still is very much in the air. It's like up in the air. There's about 7 contenders, I feel like, for about 4 spots, and the only one that looks particularly safe in this moment is Texas. Of course, that could rewire depending on what happens Saturday when Texas beats Oklahoma. Texas is a 14-point favorite, but we know sometimes the sportsbook lines can go out the window on those games. But let's get to those sportsbooks now, John. Make some picks. We're still going pretty good this season. We took a step back last week. We were each 3-3, But for the year, I'm 21-11. You are 19-13. So we are still in plus money for the year. So let's start off with Alabama, the team we began this conversation with, John. Alabama back home this weekend, 21.5-point favorite against South Carolina. South Carolina was flying high until Ole Miss comes in and humbles them on Saturday. So what do you think? Is Alabama going to recalibrate here, use this Vanderbilt game as fuel and lay it on South Carolina, or are you taking those 21.5 points the Gamecocks are getting?
I think I'll give the points. I'll use Ole Miss as an example. After a frustrating loss to Kentucky, it bounced back and beat South Carolina. South Carolina has real problems on offense, so I think Alabama. It doesn't unless South Carolina can implement that option that Vanderbilt was running. I just don't see it beating that spread.
I'm with you, and it may seem counterintuitive considering what we saw from Alabama this weekend, but it's not that counterintuitive if you saw South Carolina as they laid an egg against Ole Miss. So I will also take Alabama, give the points. This is sort of an inflection point for Kalen DeBoer's first season. How do they respond to this Vanderbilt loss? Is it a fork in the road moment that leads Alabama to the playoffs, and it's kind of a footnote to the season? Or is it the guillotine hanging over his head entering the offseason as the season goes down the drain? So we're both back on Alabama to recover this week. Moving on, I mentioned Texas is against Oklahoma this week. Texas a 14-point favorite. I really like Texas, John. I have for about the last 2 years now. I'm not fading them now. I don't believe in Oklahoma's offense at all. Maybe by November, Oklahoma will have gotten healthy enough to muster a pulse offensively, but I don't think they find it in time for this one. So I'm taking Texas to cover a 14-point spread.
I think Oklahoma could be, if the injuries heal. I've never heard of a team losing 5 wide receivers to injury. Mm-hmm. If everybody was back in the last third of the season, I think Oklahoma could do some damage, maybe to some favorites, but I just can't see it in this rivalry game. Texas doesn't appear to have any vulnerabilities. It can do a little of everything offensively. Its defense is solid. If your defense is solid, you just can't count on Oklahoma scoring more than 13, 14 points against a good defense, I don't think. So I'll go with Texas, too, and give the points.
All right, we're in lockstep so far. How about Florida at Tennessee? The Vols, despite their disgrace at Arkansas on Saturday, the Vols are still favored by 15.5 points. As I mentioned, the Swamp is a house of horrors for Tennessee, but they get this one at Neyland Stadium. Josh Heupel did win that game at Neyland a couple years ago. Florida mounted a furious fourth quarter and made things probably more interesting than they needed to be. So how much is your confidence shaken in Tennessee? John, are you comfortable enough with that 15.5-point spread to double down on the Vols, or are you taking Florida in the points?
I wouldn't say comfortable, but I certainly couldn't go the other way with my pick. I think Neyland Stadium, this is a game. Tennessee players, Dylan Sampson, it's running back, talked about the team being too lackadaisical during the bye week about taking this game for granted. It won't take Florida for granted. I mean, Florida could be 0 for the season and come into Neyland Stadium because of the history. It's won 17 of the last 19 games in the series. I think Tennessee's going to come out on fire, and I think it will cover against Florida.
Okay, I'm taking Florida in the points, sticking with my year-long theme of picking Florida. I feel like every week on this pod, I get a little uncomfortable and say, I don't feel real confident in this, but I'm taking Florida anyways, because they throw all those points in front of you, and you think, ooh, well, Florida can't be that bad, can they? And they're giving me all these points. Yeah, why not? So 15.5 points. Florida's looked a little bit better lately. I think Tennessee wins. You're right. I think Neyland will be roaring, but 15.5 just feels like it could be about a 14-point differential. So I'll without much comfort in it, I will take Florida. All right, John, this is a curious one on the sports books. They always say beware the games where the wrong team is favored. When you see the quote-unquote wrong team favored, everybody says, give me the underdog, give me the points. And then that team that was favored winds up covering the spread, and you're left having to pay your bookie. So this one feels like maybe the wrong team is favored. Ole Miss is a 3.5-point favorite at LSU. Now, if this were at a neutral site, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see Ole Miss favored. But the fact that Ole Miss is favored by 3.5 in Baton Rouge, that one surprises me a little bit. It's really tempting to just jump and say, hey, give me the home team and the points. But like I said, bettors, those professional bettors that make a living out of this, or maybe they don't make a living, but they spend too much of their savings betting on these games. These are the ones that stand out to them. So where are you going here? You taking those points for LSU, or are you going to bet the team that is curiously favored by 3.5?
There are a lot of so-called professional bettors who are living in tents. This is going to be a high-scoring game. Last year, I think it was like 55-49, some crazy score like that, or 54-49. I forget exactly what. Ole Miss won. Teams combined for probably about 1,200 yards. I don't think it'll be as high-scoring this year, but I do like LSU with the points. Ole Miss is a better team to me. It's not as vulnerable defensively, but in Tiger Stadium and LSU still in the playoff picture, I think Ole Miss will get LSU's best shot. So I'll take the points.
I think so too, John. I'm getting sucked in. I'm looking at this line saying the wrong team's favored, and all the pro gamblers out there living in tents can laugh at me because I'm getting sucked in like you. I'm taking LSU and those 3.5 points. Might be different if it was a morning game. They talk about how difficult the venue is at Tiger Stadium. You've seen it countless times. I've seen it a handful of times as well. You get an 11 a.m. kickoff, Tiger Stadium, that place could be half empty. Everybody's still hung over from the night before. A night game, they've had hair of the dog, and they're drunk again, and they're ready to roll.
Well, they have two kinds of fans there. Some that have to pace themselves, so they start drinking for these night games about 12:01 p.m. Then they have a sinking spell. Then they bounce back. And then there's another type fan who just keeps going. Starts at 12:01 and drinks right on through. And the combination is absolutely lethal for the opposing team because you can just yell louder when you're drunk. I don't know if there's a scientific study that backs me up on that, but from my personal experience being in a stadium and being in Tiger Stadium surrounded by fans, I definitely think they're louder when they're drunk. And LSU fans have just relentless stamina. If they have a sinking spell, they bounce back at kickoff time.
John, if this game is close, I think drunken LSU fans will storm the field if they win. It's a top 10 matchup. The sports books are, by the time this game kicks off, that line will narrow, I think. It'd be close. But LSU fans love storming the field. I mean, like few others. They don't need much incentive to storm the field. So they'll look up and say, hey, we were at kickoff maybe a 2-point underdog. Our blood alcohol content's twice the legal limit. Hell, why not? Let's storm the field.
Yeah, they did that, I think, 2 years ago after a lot of fans, I think, when they watched Tennessee storm the field after beating Alabama and then take the goalpost down the river, LSU fans love a good party, and they saw that in Neyland Stadium. What a party. Let's just storm the field. It wouldn't matter if LSU were playing Kent State and won. Let's get out there, man. Let's take those goalposts down. So, yeah, you're right. I think that was a good move for ABC picking up. I think it's ABC that's picking up that game, have it as a night game. The atmosphere will be tremendous.
John, I normally have a policy on this pod that we don't pick Vanderbilt games, but as you know, we're always reevaluating things. We're willing to admit when we're wrong. We'll jump off a bandwagon and board a new one. So all aboard, anchor down. And what a scene in Nashville on Saturday, John, with thousands, hundreds, if not thousands, of Vanderbilt fans in attendance. Now, they were outnumbered by Alabama fans in their own stadium by about 4-1. But when
I would
Vanderbilt
say
won,
10 to 1,
10 to
thought.
1.
Go
Okay,
ahead.
they were outnumbered
Yeah,
10-1 in
excuse
their
me.
own
Yeah.
stadium. But the hundreds, if not thousands, of Vanderbilt fans that were there moseyed their way down to the field afterwards. And then they seemed to multiply. Did you notice that, John? I mean, you watched the whole game, and it looked like there was a smattering of about 800 to maybe 1,500 Vanderbilt fans in the stands. And then somehow, after they beat Alabama, they got down on the field, and like I said, it was like there were rabbits down there or something, because 800 seemed to turn into 5,000 down on the field afterwards. Maybe they opened the gates to the side of the stadium and just let in some passersby and say, "Hey, come on out here and storm the field with us." And then next thing you know, they're marching those goalposts through the street and into the river.
Well, I was wondering if I noticed that too, because my wife was looking at it and said, she's, God, there must be 2,000 Vanderbilt fans out there. I said, no way. There weren't 2,000 Vanderbilt fans in the stadium. Only possibility are maybe Alabama fans, alcohol-induced stupor, just wandered out there on the field. Hey, let's check this out.
Yeah, I had one of those reversible jerseys or something, flipped it over to the black side after been wearing crimson all game. Well, we've evolved our policies, and we're now picking a Vanderbilt game on the pod here today, John. Kentucky is hosting Vanderbilt, and Kentucky is a 13.5-point favorite. I'm going to take the Cats. This smells of letdown game after the big win. You always talk about, John, it's a great point you make on the pod. How will teams handle success? Well, Vanderbilt has no clue how to handle success because they've never experienced any. They're set up well for life after college. In college, they are a whipping boy, and they don't know what to do when they're the ones doing the whipping. And to the extent that we've seen it, we saw it earlier this year, John, where Vanderbilt upset Virginia Tech, start the season 2-0. Then they head to the road to your program, Georgia State, and they lose to Georgia State. That's what's comical about the SEC apologists taking up for Vanderbilt and taking up for Alabama on the heels of this loss, is this belief that Vanderbilt's world beaters. No, Vanderbilt just lost to Georgia State a few weeks ago. They're better. Don't think they're world beaters. Don't think they handle the success that they experienced in beating Alabama. So I'm going to go ahead and take Kentucky and say they will cover at home the 13.5-point spread.
Think of all the coaches in college football who are lacking a quality quarterback and should be kicking themselves for not trying to get Diego Pavia to transfer to their school.
Mm-hmm.
New Mexico State. I mean, he went he was billed as a giant killer already. He went to Auburn last year. New Mexico State beat Auburn by 21 points. Did no one notice? Hey, I think that Auburn of all teams should have noticed. Hey, that guy's better than what we have. Yeah, he is. So credits to Vanderbilt, credits to Clark Lee, and he's got Tim Beck as his offensive coordinator. The offense is rolling. But you're right. Vanderbilt can live off this Alabama game probably a couple of years. So it can just kind of kick back now and with a laissez-faire attitude and not worry about anything. And I think I picked Kentucky too, even though just from watching the teams, if it weren't for Vanderbilt's history, if that had been another team and it accomplished what Vanderbilt did and it's getting 13.5 points in Lexington, I'd take that team in a heartbeat. Vanderbilt, no thanks. I'll take Kentucky.
Still skeptical of the Doors after that early season apology, John. I mean, yeah, I know you think the world of them, but...
Oh, I do. I mean, they're dear to my heart, and he's one of my favorite quarterbacks now. So I'm prepared to jump on that bandwagon full force if the Commodores beat Kentucky.
All right, that leaves us with our locks of the week. And John, I know you like to ride the momentum. Once you got somebody identified, you stick with it. And sometimes that strategy has foiled you in the past, but it's been pretty good for you this season. Well, I am going to take out a page out of your playbook, and I'm going to be doubling down on my lock this week as well. I took Clemson last week to cover a 13.5-point spread at Florida State. They did so. Clemson has really recovered well from that second half collapse against Georgia in the season opener. And I'm starting to buy into the idea of Clemson can rally their way into the college football playoff. Well, this week they are at Wake Forest. Clemson favored by 19.5 against a Wake Forest team that's really struggled this year. Wake Forest earlier this season lost to UL Lafayette. They've lost to Virginia. They got pummeled. So 19.5 on the road. I think Clemson can get it done. Like I said, taking the page from your playbook and sticking with what works, I'll say Clemson will deliver for me again as the lock.
Well, obviously that's the strategy I've employed this year. Kent State isn't my lock of the week. It's my lock of the millennium. I mean, the only reason I didn't pick Kent State as my lock last week is because it had an open date. Mm-hmm. Open date won by 3 against the Golden Flashes. So I'll go with Kent State. It's only a 6.5-point dog, I think, to Ball State, which is, you look at Ball State and you say, well, that's a really bad team. Yeah, but Kent State can take a bad team and make it look almost competent. So that, to me, even though the game is at Kent State, I mean, does anybody go to those games? I'll go with Ball State, and whoever Kent State's playing next week, I'm picking Kent State.
You're picking against Kent State, correct?
Yeah, I mean, Kent State. Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry.
All
I
right.
think of it as being for Kent State because I'm for that program. What I like about it is you think it's bottomed out, and it says, get a load of this, and out they go.
Get a load of this, John. Vanderbilt beat Alabama. We're living in a world in which Vanderbilt has now beat Alabama in the last 40 years, and Kalen DeBoer has a loss to Vanderbilt. Lots of developments in the college football playoff picture, and the turmoil, the murkiness is not clearing up yet. Could be in store for some more this weekend with a lot of top 25 matchups. Stay tuned, and we'll be back with you to discuss next week on SEC Football Unfiltered.